There's a long history of radicalism here in Glasgow. For instance, in 1820 there was the aptly named Radical War, which came just after the Napoleonic Wars, which was a pretty turbulent time in Britain. For instance, it was also the same time that there was the Peterloo Massacre. The British Army was able to restore order in a week before much damage was done, but these weren't even the first radicals here in Glasgow. For instance, Thomas More founded the Society of the Friends of the People during the French Revolution and demanded reforms. He in fact had connections with the rebellion Irishmen, but was deported to Australia, however was able to escape and make his way to America and then to France, where he was warmly received. But Glasgow throughout the 19th century continued to produce radicals like Willie Nairn, an early Marxist, but it was in the early 20th century that it all began to kick off. Before World War I, the number of trade unionists skyrocketed to around 250,000 and many people went on strike. Plus, there was also the Clydeside Worker Committee that published the workers' paper and spoke against World War I, and Marxists like John McLean began to preach for Celtic communism. There are many reasons as to why this is the case. For instance, there was increasing rent and squalid conditions and long working hours, and just after World War I they began to campaign for a 40-hour work week. I should say that just after World War I there was a lot of uproar across Britain. Now, in some places they began to target foreigners for stealing their jobs, and in other places like Chopwell, just outside Newcastle, it's called Little Moscow because they raised the red flag. And also in Newcastle, and that's where Rudolf Abel is from, the sort of famous Soviet spy. His father began shipping weapons to the Bolsheviks during this time. But here in Glasgow, 100,000 people gathered to demand a 40-hour work week. But the government was fearful of a sort of communist uprising. After all, communists in Russia had just ousted the Tsar. There was also communist uprising in Germany and Hungary. So when the police failed to contain the crowd, the army was sent in. And 10,000 troops from the Highlands and the South, along with tanks and howitzers, shot at the crowd and injured many people. Protests quickly subsided and they weren't promised a 40-hour work week, but in the 1922 election Labour gained 85 seats and they took power a year later, and Glasgow became a Labour stronghold for nearly a century until the SNP swept a lot of the seats here in the 2015 election.